We begin tonight in Iran, where the supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, has given his first video address since the ceasefire. He's been in hiding since Israel began its attacks 2 weeks ago. But earlier today, he gave his first televised remarks, which were broadcast on state media. He claimed victory over Israel and said that Iran had delivered a, quote, heavy slap to the United States. And the Ayatollah gave his take on the big question of the moment. How much damage did the US bombing at the weekend do to Iran's nuclear program? He acknowledged that the Americans had hit the facilities, but said they couldn't achieve anything significant. And he said the US president had exaggerated the description of what had been done. He also threatened to carry out more strikes on American bases in the region if Iran came under attack again.
I
want to congratulate the great Iranian nation. I would like to offer a few congratulations to the nation. First, congratulations on the victory over the fallacious Zionist regime. Despite all the noise and claims, the Zionist regime almost collapsed under the blows of the Islamic Republic. The President of the United States exaggerated events in unusual ways, and it turned out that he needed this exaggeration. Anyone who has heard these words has understood that there is another truth behind these words. They had failed to take action and had not achieved their intended objective. The Islamic Republic dealt a severe slap to the face of America. It attacked and inflicted damage on the Al Udeid air base, which is one of the key U.S. bases in the region. The same people who exaggerated the issue in that case, U.S. strikes on Iranian nuclear sites, tried to minimize it. Iranian strikes on U.S. base in Qatar, and pretend that nothing had happened. When a major event had occurred, they attacked our nuclear facilities, which of course would merit criminal prosecution in international courts, but they did nothing significant. This U.S. asking Iran to surrender is a grave insult by the Americans towards the Iranian nation, and such an event will never happen. It will never happen. The Islamic Republic has access to important U.S. bases in the region and can act against them whenever it deems it necessary is a significant matter. It can happen again in the future. If an attack occurs, the cost to the enemy and the aggressor will certainly be high.
Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Meanwhile, the US CIA director and Trump loyalist John Radcliffe has backed the US president's claim that American bombing severely damaged Iran's nuclear sites. He and the US Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, are the latest administration officials to push back against an initial Pentagon assessment that the strikes didn't destroy the core parts of the Iranian nuclear program and may only have set it back by months. Mr. Radcliffe said intelligence from a, quote, historically reliable source indicated that key sites had been destroyed and would have to be rebuilt over the course of years. But he stopped short of saying that Iran's nuclear ambitions had been eliminated outright. President Trump had claimed that his bombing of Iran's nuclear sites had obliterated the country's nuclear program, but the question of how much this could be true has been hanging over Washington.
Because of decisive military action, President Trump created the conditions to end the war, decimating, choose your word, obliterating, destroying Iran's nuclear capabilities. The press corps doesn't want to write about it. Or bring us to the topic of the moment, the highly successful strikes in Iran. Let me read the bottom line here. President Trump directed the most complex and secretive military operation in history, and it was a resounding success, resulting in a ceasefire agreement and the end of the 12-day war. There are so many aspects of what our brave men and women did that, because of the hatred of this press corps, are undermined because your people are trying to leak and spin that it wasn't successful. It's irresponsible. And folks in this room are privy to that information because of the proximity here in the Pentagon. It's an important responsibility. And time and time again, classified information is leaked or peddled for political purposes to try to make the president look bad. And what's really happening is you're undermining the success of incredible B-2 pilots and incredible F-35 pilots and incredible refuelers and incredible air defenders who accomplished their mission, set back a nuclear program in ways that other presidents would have dreamed. How about we celebrate that?
I believe it was total obliteration. I believe they didn't have a chance to get anything out because we acted fast. If it would have taken 2 weeks, maybe, but it's very hard to remove that kind of material. Very hard and very dangerous for them to remove it. Plus, they knew we were coming. And if they know we're coming, they're not going to be down there. There aren't too many people that are going to be down there. Pete, do you have something to say about it? But had we not succeeded with that hit ended the war. That hit ended the war. I don't want to use an example of Hiroshima. I don't want to use an example of Nagasaki. But that was essentially the same thing. That ended that war. This ended that with the war. If we didn't take that out, they'd be fighting right now.
Donald Trump, and before him, his Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth. Well, for more on this, I'm joined now on the line from London by the international affairs analyst, Dr. Marek Laskiewicz. Good to see you, Dr. Laskiewicz. Let's start with Iran's Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, giving his first televised address since the ceasefire. What's your analysis of the Iranian leader's message? Predictably, he presented Iran as the victorious side in this war.
Well, yes, it's only to be expected, of course. He has presented this whole thing with a bit of spin, I think, as being a victor. I don't see as a victor. I don't think anybody can see that he is a victor, considering that the Israelis bombed at will whole areas of Iran, and that the Americans also bombed heavily too in that one very important strike. On the other hand, he has temporarily acquired a ceasefire. He did shell, or rather missile, an American base and of course Israel. So it was not entirely one-sided. And to the extent that the regime lives on, and to the extent that his nuclear program, isn't entirely destroyed, because it would appear to be set back. There's no question of that. But it's not destroyed, and nuclear ambitions have certainly not been put aside either, judging by his address. To that extent, he didn't lose. Well, not losing is not quite the same as a victory, but with a bit of a spin, he made that into a victory.
Yes, and you mentioned the nuclear facilities. I mean, in that speech, he was insisting that the U.S. attacks did not inflict significant damage on them. And this is, of course, coming at a time when the U.S. is very much embroiled in its own controversy over how much damage has been inflicted.
Actually, it's a very old problem to know how much damage you've inflicted on the enemy. And the idea that it's total, which is what President Donald Trump and his followers are suggesting, as opposed to the more cautious ones. This also happened in World War II, for example. In fact, the more cautious estimates turned out to be correct in the case of England. And I suggest here too, not necessarily totally, but unquestionably, it does appear to be the case that it's not total obliteration. Where President Donald Trump is right is that his strike did at least bring about a ceasefire. So therefore, there must be something he did right there, and there must be some damage. But whether it is as damage as serious as he's implying, this does not appear to be the case. There's the case of the 400 prepared uranium amount, which has been moved. And it would appear to have been moved in advance because Israel has said that it knows where it is, or at least is following this. It would appear also that as they had already some foreknowledge of the fact that America would strike, some equipment has been moved. So we can say that it's not totally obliterated. But I think we can safely say that significant damage was done. And the key point is, as President Donald Trump said, that they sued for a ceasefire. The Iranians, that is.
Indeed. But of course, the US CIA Director, John Radcliffe, who is a Trump sympathizer, has backed President Trump's claims that the American bombing severely damaged nuclear sites. I mean, pushing back against that initial Pentagon assessment that the strikes didn't destroy the core parts of the Iranian program and may only have set it back by months. What's your assessment of all that?
The problem is the CIA is not very good at military stuff. It's happened before in the Gulf War when they reckoned Saddam Hussein could carry on fighting, whereas in fact the Pentagon said no. The reason is that this is military. Since then, perhaps the CIA has improved. However, the key point is that it is very hard to know how much the damage is. Whether it's only a question of months, that is a very accurate decision by the Pentagon. I'm not sure they're going to be able to hold that one up. But even if it comes out to be, say, a year or two, if you like, damage, the point is there that then both sides are right. One side saying years, one side saying months. If it's a year or two, somewhere in between, then both sides will claim they were right all along. What is significant, and here I think the Pentagon is correct, is there is no evidence of any sort that it was a total obliteration. There are no radioactive leaks. There is nothing to suggest that everything has been destroyed. And so their cautious report, which President Donald Trump does not like, actually is a very important and significant that not all of America wishes to live in this gung-ho universe where everything they do works first time. However, please note, it must have some damage, and I estimate myself it's not just a few months but more, otherwise Iran would not have gone for a ceasefire.
So really the bottom line is that we're dealing with something we don't know, and it'll be several days before we can have an accurate assessment. And just moving on a little from that, there are of course these upcoming diplomatic talks between America and Iranian officials. What's your assessment of how both sides view this and the diplomatic aims of those talks? I mean, let's start with the Iranians. What do you think their red lines are in terms of, the new nuclear deal with Washington?
Well, here is the key point, and this, in fact, goes back to the previous conversation we had. If the Iranians are prepared to scale back everything, it means that America really did hurt them. If not, then it's clear America did not. I think, as far as I can tell from everything that's being said, Iran will agree to some small enrichment. I think they'll go back from 60%. I think that they will not agree, and this is the red line, to having 0% enrichment. I think that it might be possible, despite the fact that the Iranians are debating whether to have anything more to do with any nuclear watchdogs. This is, I think, irrelevant, and that Iran will agree to nuclear watchdogs coming in. But then again, Israel, from its point of view, it's the other way around. Unless it gets zero, it means Iran can scale back up again. Because after all, they already had an agreement previously that Iran would stay at very low numbers, like 3-4% enrichment. And suddenly they've gone all the way up to 60. And so therefore, the key question is whether Donald Trump will secure a 0% enrichment, i.e. total abandonment. This I don't think is possible. He might be prepared to compromise again on the same percentage, but please note, if it's a low percentage, this is precisely the agreement he pulled out of in 2015, back when he came in, calling it the worst ever deal. So the point I'm making here is that we seem to be, after many years, arriving at where we were before Donald Trump pulled out of the deal. And in this sense, there's very little happened except for a huge bombing campaign. It remains to be seen whether Iran can hold on to any nuclear program at all. If this America does not permit it, I think, unfortunately, the war will continue.
Well, I think it's interesting that the reason the Iranians started enriching their uranium beyond the agreed percentage was because Donald Trump pulled out of that agreement. I mean, that was they kept it down to that 3%. If you look at the graph, it shows very clearly that after the agreement, all the way up till when Donald Trump pulled out, they were enriching at the agreed level. And then as soon as he pulled out, they started enriching it at a higher level, which many have construed to be a sort of bargaining chip to try and get the Americans back. But that didn't work, did it?
I'm not sure it ever was a bargaining chip myself. I believe that when Donald Trump pulled out, there's two other factors you haven't noted. First of all, the Iranians, for them, America is an enemy. And so enrichment is part of their defense program, not so much a bargaining chip, but actual defense. And secondly, the regime, after Khomeini, is absolutely committed to the destruction of Israel. And therefore enriching also served the purpose here. So I don't think it actually was a bargaining chip. The point is, when Donald Trump pulled out of the agreement, it sort of gave a green light. And I think they may have construed it completely differently to what Donald Trump had in mind. I think he had in mind perhaps a better agreement from America and Israel's point of view, whereas what they saw was, if he pulls out of the agreement, they've got green light to go ahead. And therefore, from this point of view, the negotiations will now show precisely what agreement finally Donald Trump wants. If he said the previous agreement was bad, what does he propose in exchange? What does he want? And the next few days, when they start all the negotiations, we'll find out. I suspect he's going for 0%. I suspect the Iranians won't agree and want some percentage, and we'll see if they can compromise. However, watch this space, so to speak, because it's going to be very interesting negotiations for the next week or two.
Indeed, and I guess the big question now is, what is there to negotiate? Because, I mean, President Trump, in his usual style, has been sending conflicting messages. Yesterday he said he doesn't care whether there's an agreement or not, because he said U.S. strikes obliterated Iran's nuclear program.
Yeah, it is very hard actually to get on board fully with Donald Trump's thinking. I agree with you on that one. As far as I can tell, his point was actually quite different, that if Iran does not agree to what he wants, he's going to carry on bombing. And if he hasn't deliberated it, he can always obliterate it. But in any case, right now, the negotiations are pointless because he has obliterated them as far as he knows. Well, all this means is that negotiations are quite weird, because what precisely, as you say, they negotiate about, well, not for what's going to happen right now, because Donald Trump thinks there's no uranium there to be worried about, but what they're going to be negotiating about is what about the future? And this is the key point. Is America, and of course Israel, prepared to accept any sort of percentage enrichment at all? Or conversely, is Iran prepared to accept the loss of its program? Since the answer to both appears to be no, as far as I can tell, the answer is probably the war will continue, unless Donald Trump were to agree to the 3%, which is what he did 8 years ago. So, well, that's 10 years now. So I don't think he will.
Yeah, I think a lot of people would agree with you that this ceasefire is, at least appears to be, a temporary truce, and they're not really that optimistic going forward. But I mean, let's go backwards, looking at the last 2 weeks or so during which this conflict took place. What surprised you the most about it all?
I'm surprised really that Iran didn't prepare better for it. Israeli intelligence with these assassinations was also another one. They got to a lot of key people very easily. And on top of that, as I say, they took out the anti-aircraft facilities. But Iran has had years to prepare for this. So it's quite strange that they have had absolutely no ability at all. It's all very well saying now Russia should come in on their help. But to be honest, Iran should have been preparing for this with this missile program before. And therefore, what the net effect of this is that it's actually shown up Iran to be far weaker than people supposed. And so from this point of view, I think that was the biggest military surprise. If I would mention another one, it's the hypersonic missiles, the ones that got through to Israel. That is I think the one that worries Israel. because obviously you put a nuclear warhead on top, it's not just going to be an apartment block. It might be the entire town or city that's taken out. And this is why the negotiations about the uranium for Israel are absolutely crucial, because couple the missiles that did get through from Iran with the nukes, and you have a nation that could, in theory, take out Israel. And that, I think, is going to be the key point that emerges out of this war, apart from the fact, as I've said, that Iran has shown itself to be far weaker than we imagined on the normal, conventional war front.
Dr. Laskiewicz, thank you ever so much. Dr. Marek Laskiewicz is the International Affairs Analyst. He was talking to me on the line from London.